Thanks, Lucy. It's great to be here. It's great to talk about this topic. Has anybody in the room not heard of the One Belt, One Road? Okay, have you heard of the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI? Okay, the BRI. It's more commonly known now as the BRI. It was called the One Belt, One Road when it started, but it's called the BRI now because the government wants it to be seen as an initiative rather than a road or a belt so much. So the word initiative comes up as a kind of perhaps a bit more, a different way of saying it that's a bit more benign. What I'm going to talk today about is some ideas that I've been fermenting in my mind, fermenting so much that I think there's a project behind it. I think there's a very good project to understand what's going on in Eurasia. Now, the One Belt, One Road, as I will mention a little bit later, I'm using a term called assemblage. It's an assemblage. It's a bit like bits and pieces stuck on that can be taken off or added on. So it becomes different as it develops. It won't be the same next year or the year after, and it wasn't the same as it was 2 years ago. As it's being developed, more bits and pieces are being added to it. And more players are coming in, and some of them are coming in with enthusiasm and some are coming in reluctantly. And for Australia is sort of positioned outside the BRI, One Belt, One Road, but perhaps we should be thinking that we are part of the BRI. I mean, there is an argument to say we should be. So I'll move on and my talk today includes a little bit of my personal history. So if you can bear with a little bit of my personal history when I was very young, some of you might like to see that because this was before we had selfies. You know, before we had selfies, people actually took photographs. When my father used to have this camera that he used to take a lot of time to set up with his camera. And, you know, everyone's got to stand still, get the light meter. It was very infuriating. Now everybody's just click, click, click. So I called it the Belt and Road Initiative, Knowledge, Power and Regional Engagement. So see how we go. The current project that I'm working on is this one here. This is called Digital China, From Cultural Presence to Innovative Nation. And this is a ARC research project which is already in its second year. And what we're trying to assess, if you like, is the influence of Chinese culture as it goes outside China through various online platforms. This didn't happen 10 years ago because the online platforms weren't there. Now the online platforms are there. It's going out very, very quickly. And we've got good survey results already. And it's showing us some very interesting things about how Chinese culture is being consumed in various places. For example, South Korea. It's actually doing reasonably well in South Korea, which was a bit of a surprise to us. Although there are some caveats we need to add. Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Australia. So we're covering all that territory. And Japan. So the question there is, can China use the digital power of the internet to achieve international recognition as an innovative nation? It wanted to be an innovative nation in 2006. In 2006 they said, we are going to be an innovative nation by 2020. Okay, it's 2018 now, and they are there. They are probably there as an innovative nation, depending upon how you want to discuss that question. What does innovative nation mean? So where are we going? The Belt and Road. Okay, the BRI. The Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, describes the overland corridors that connect Western China with Europe via Central and South Asia. And it was initiated by President Xi Jinping in 2013. He actually initiated it in Kazakhstan and then later in Indonesia. The BRI also includes the maritime routes that link China's southern provinces to Southeast Asia and beyond. That's a little bit more controversial, so I'm not going to be talking about that so much today. Well, perhaps I will. The symbolic legacy of this initiative is the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads is a concept that emerged in the modern era to account for pre-modern forms of long-distance connectivity, trade and cultural exchange across Asia. So I think everyone's heard of the term Silk Roads. It's kind of etched in people's memories, and it means different things depending upon your knowledge of the Silk Roads. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in China. What is the change in the Chinese economic model? And we can look at One Belt, One Road, or the BRI through an economic lens. But I'm not going to do that specifically today. But just in case I want to have it covered, I want to have this argument covered. We used to associate China with the world factory, and many people still do. But the world factory is no longer China. China is moving up the value chain to making more value-added goods, and the processing industries that used to be done in China are moving elsewhere. So this chart shows the processing and foreign invested exports decline. They are declining in China. So China is getting away from that model towards a different kind of model, a more consumption-based model. And China's exports, at the same time, have become more focused on emerging markets. So while it did send a lot of stuff around the world, and you find it everywhere in the Walmarts and the Amarts and the big W's, you also find they're actually targeting emerging markets. Now I'm going to look at the BRI, or I'm calling it the Digital Silk Roads. That's my big idea. It's not my big idea, but it's a big idea that I'm sharing. Because other people, in the last couple of years, other people have jumped on the Digital Silk Roads idea, but I had the idea about a year ago too, but everyone said that's a great idea, the Digital Silk Roads, and I'm going to explain what the Digital Silk Roads are. But three optics, three ways of seeing that this is connectivity, artificial intelligence and online platforms, empire, statecraft and sovereignty, and civilization, the Silk Road of shared pasts and futures. These are the three areas that I'm going to unpack in giving a kind of, I hope, what will be a deeper understanding of the BRI than what we normally get. What we normally get in the field is strategic analysis, international relations, economics, looks at the Silk Road from those perspectives. What hasn't really been tapped into is the deeper levels, which is the civilization level. So the key questions are, what form does Chinese digital power take in the region? And to understand that, we have to understand what Chinese digital power is, and I'll explain what that is. How are representations of the BRI renegotiated, contested and communicated to the world? So the BRI, or the Silk Roads, or the One Belt, One Road, whatever you call it, it's a contested idea. There's a lot of players that have shared that history. So what we find now is that China is moving in there and trying to put their version of that history forward, and how they're doing it, and who else is doing it. Why is the development of China's digital power critical to the future of Asia and Australia's role in Asia? And that's an important question. My argument will be that as China becomes a digital power, and it probably is there already, the rest of Asia is going to lose out. And this is an argument put forward by somebody else, but I'll explain more as we go on. So that was me at the age of about 6 years old, and it was about the time that my family decided we were going to go to the UK, and I didn't know where I was going, but a nice little picture of the globe, and that was a staged photograph. All my brother and sister all had a photograph next to the globe, but I was there next to the globe, wondering where is this going to take me. What we did then was we actually got on a ship. We got on a ship. This was 1959. This was 60 years ago, actually. Almost 60 years ago, when I was 8 years old. And we got on a ship, and the ship left from Fremantle. The ship actually went from Melbourne, jumped on the ship in Melbourne, sailed to Fremantle, got off in Fremantle, had a look around, and then we went across the Indian Ocean. Very leisurely across the Indian Ocean, and I remember looking back over the edge of the boat and watching these flying fish, and I thought, wow, flying fish, and I didn't know. They're probably dolphins, but at the time someone said flying fish, and they could have been swordfish or whatever, but now I think they're probably dolphins, because you get a lot of dolphins around the area. What we used to do on the ship, we used to do things like, turn my sound off. This was one of the activities on the ship, because the ship took a month. It took a month to get to the UK. So on a boat, a big boat like that, they were called the P&O. The P&O, and the P&O was a company that was started up called the Pacific and Orient something trading company that used to service the Indies, India and those areas, the colonies. It was a British company. Later on, it became the boats were used to transport people from the colonies. And as we were in the colonies, so to speak, in Australia, this was the way you got to the UK in 1959. You could fly, but the flying was a little bit more. Most people did it on a boat, and it was a great experience. I had a great time on the boat. And that was one of the survival aid games that people used to play. And I'm probably somewhere in that picture, but I don't know where. We went to Ceylon first, and Ceylon then was called now called Sri Lanka. It was called Ceylon then. We went to Colombo, and we went around Colombo, and we had a elephant ride, and then we went to Bombay, and I remember Bombay very clearly because the smell was pretty bad, and there were. I mean, Ceylon was. I remember the fragrant smell of temples, incense. And that was great. And Ceylon had a nice sort of memory for me. When I got to Bombay, there were kind of people grabbing at you, white tourists, and you looked in the sky and there were these vultures. The vultures were, they pointed to the place where the bodies were buried. Not buried, rather. The bodies were laid out for the vultures. And that was the Zoroastrian way of burial. And that was very close to the ship. So the memories of Bombay were not that great. I only stayed there one day. But yeah, for a young kid, it's quite interesting. The next stop was Aden, and Aden is in Yemen, what they now call Yemen, and these ships, these boats would come up to the ships, and they would try and sell things to the people on the boat, And I remember my father bought some of the handicrafts, and later on we had them in our home, and that was on the way there. So that's Yemen. And during those days, if you went to the UK, you would go through the Suez Canal. And not many people know what the Suez Canal is, or we know that it's an area that's had a lot of regime changes and assassinations and insurrections over a period of time. But in those days, the ship would leisurely go through the Suez Canal. And my father got off the boat. My father there, he got off the boat and decided to go and ride a camel and go and look at the pyramids. And we didn't get that chance because we had to stay on the boat. But he was kind of lucky, so he took the photographs. White guy on a camel. In those days, quite rare. They had the Sphinx in the background there. So that was. I didn't realise then, but I was actually going the Maritime Silk Road. That was the Maritime Silk Road then, pretty much. And much later on, I remember asking when I was a bit older, I went to see a fortune teller, as you do sometimes. And, when you're young, you go to a fortune teller. What's my future? And they said, your future. I can look in my crystal ball. I can read your aura, and your future. You will go to Asia. You'll go north to Asia. And I thought, oh, Asia? No, I didn't register with me at the time. I had no idea of going to Asia, except perhaps to go to Asia, to go to Europe. And that's basically what I did in 1989. I decided to go to Europe via Asia. So I went to, I booked my flight to go to Beijing, and then to catch the train from Beijing to London via Paris. But then what happened was, that was 1989, and that was June the 2nd, 1989, and that was when the Tiananmen Square incident was on. So I made a snap decision. I went to London first. Stayed in London, bought a bicycle, cycled around the UK, cycled through Europe, made my way to Moscow. Moscow, caught the train there, Trans-Siberian, back the other way. When I got to Beijing, I took the train from Beijing right out to Xinjiang. Xinjiang's the western provinces. And Xinjiang, my friend the donkey there, I remember writing in my diary, I woke to the sounds of Muslims praying and donkeys braying, and that was my experience there. And then I got on a bus, and the bus took me out to Kashgar, or trains call it Kasha. Kasha is the western station, right on the Silk Road. It's where the traders would go. And that's the bus there, and the bus was, nowadays it's very fast. Very fast buses or planes get you to Kashgar in 1 hour, 2 hours. In those days it was 2.5 days. 2.5 days by bus, and it was pretty hard going. The road was being made, the Silk Road was being made as we went. I mean, that's not very amazing. I mean, things like that happen in Australia. You're travelling on a road and the road's being made, but the road was actually being made as we went along, pretty much. So we would get out and you would buy things and people would pop up from holes in the ground, caves, to sell you things along the Silk Road. And this was probably the way it was thousands of years ago. Then we get to Kashgar, and Kashgar's a big marketplace of Uyghur people and Kazakhs, Uyghurs, and I had an experience there in Kashgar, very, very interesting. And then I finally found my way home after a period of being away. But that was where I travelled. This is what the Chinese are writing. They're kind of rewriting over their version of the Silk Road, how they want to see it described, how they want to see it. They're calling it the One Belt, One Road, but they're also flipping between Silk Road as well, because they want to bring the whole thing into one kind of narrative that's benign and friendly. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute. But what Australia, you could argue that 20,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, that's 20,000 years ago, Australia was connected to the One Belt, One Road, because the landmass actually connected Australia to what was now New Guinea, and that through to Indonesia. So 20 years ago we were part of the One Belt, One Road, if you want to put it that way. Question is, are we part of the One Belt, One Road now? Or how can we be part of the One Belt, One Road? So we can be part of the One Belt, One Road. Actually, this is a theme park in the Gold Coast. That's been a concept that's been come up by the Mayor of the Gold Coast in collaboration with the Chinese to do an Australian-Chinese theme park. And they're calling it a One Belt, One Road theme park, Australia theme park. You know, now that the one on the Gold Coast, used to be called Australian. You know that thing on the Gold Coast, that Australian wacky place, where that's been closed down. So there's an opportunity for a Chinese Australian theme. Not the Dream World, the one on the Sunshine Coast.
The one abroad. The one called the one abroad.
Something like that. It's a wacky sort of pub that was there, and it represented Australia. So now this could represent Australia, and they decided they'd put the Uluru in there without asking the Indigenous people if that was okay. So this, when it goes ahead, this was an original concept draft. So the One Belt, One Road can be in Australia if you stretch it. Okay, yeah, okay, we stretch it. Well, it can be stretched, and it is being stretched, and this is why we can think of it as an assemblage. An assemblage is, as I mentioned before, it's the power of these assemblages. It's maximised when they function as systems with well-defined interfaces and communication circuits between sensors, actuators, processors, storage media. This is a more a technical description of a digital assemblage, but assemblage is a metaphor for things that can be added and taken off. For example, you know, I would argue that the creative economy idea is an assemblage. It's a policy assemblage that bits and pieces have been added onto it and taken off. So thinking of it as something that's kind of flexible and evolving is what I mean. So again, I hark back to the questions I raised at the beginning, which is, what form does Chinese digital power take in the region? And that's a pretty important question, I think, because I think that a lot of people talk about Chinese strategic power and Chinese infrastructural power, but when we get to the question of Chinese digital power, this is a bit frightening, actually, depending on which way you want to look at it. How representations of the BRI negotiated, contested and communicated to the world. And this is what's going on. Within the time that President Xi Jinping announced the BRI in 2013, but by 2015 there have been over 2,750 articles published in the Chinese Knowledge Database about the BRI. It created an industry of people writing about retranslating the BRI in Chinese terms and hooking it up with the Silk Roads, for better or for worse. So one idea that's I think is quite interesting is this idea of infrastructure and infrastructural space. And if we talk about the way that the BRI is being remapped, you know, obviously the infrastructural space is a concept that's used by Kelly Easterling in this book called Extra Statecraft, The Power of Infrastructure Space. And she says it's conditions by which certain things are made possible. Well, actually, that's actually my paraphrasing of infrastructural space. I wrote that, actually. Conditions by which certain things are made possible, for instance, productive cooperation and innovation, or sustained cultural diversity, whereas other things remain contested identities, maps and boundaries. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this idea of infrastructure is, because generally people associate the One Belt, One Road or the BRI with infrastructure, and it is infrastructure. It's building ports, bridges, tunnels, roads, but there's more than that. So getting back to this three optics, which I'm going to unpack here. The first optic is connectivity, the second optic is empire, the third is civilization. And the first idea I want to talk about is the idea of digital superpower. And this is Alibaba's campus. So Alibaba's, if you go to Hangzhou and you go to see Alibaba, they've built a whole new campus in an area of Hangzhou that was nothing 10 years ago, Yuhang district. And the local government's thrown in a lot of money, and you walk around Alibaba campus and everyone's on their phones, everyone's connected, everyone's working hard 24/7, not 24/7, but they're working very hard, and they're stressed because Alibaba is pushing people to work hard. So when we talk about the idea of China as a digital nation, we have to take into account the rest of the world. And this graphic here is interesting. This is 2017, but it shows the relative uptake of Chinese online applications compared to the dominant ones. And you can see that Facebook and YouTube are really quite ahead, and even WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, but coming up quite fast is WeChat. And further down you've got Sina Weibo and Baidu. You've got the Chinese platforms that are emerging. Now, will they dominate? That's the question. Because from what we've seen, and I'm not sure if I've got a graphic. I'll just see if I've got a graphic to show. Yeah, what we see particularly, from our early observations, is that WeChat is in the green, and it's hardly even used in South Korea. People don't want to use it. Don't use it. If you go to Taiwan, it's quite small. If you go to Hong Kong, it's used more. And in Singapore, it's not. The platforms that are being used still are the Western platforms, because these places identify with the dominant platforms in the world, the dominant platforms. It won't always be that way, because if you're going to do business in China, you've got to use WeChat. So as China becomes more of a digital power, more people will be using WeChat. So what does that mean? So connectivity. This is a very interesting book called AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley and the New World Order. And it only came out 3 weeks ago, but I've read it. Well, I've actually listened to it on Audible. I didn't read it. I listened to it because it was instantly out on Audible, which makes it a lot easier to absorb. But what his arguments is now, who is Li Kai-fu? Li Kai-fu is a Taiwanese entrepreneur, digital entrepreneur who got his education in the US, went to the US very early, grew up in the Silicon Valley sort of system. Then he became associated with Microsoft Research Lab in China. Then he was headhunted for Google China. Until 2009, he was at Google China, trying to get Google into China. Then after that, he left Google China and started up a thing called Sinovation. And Sinovation is a kind of way of bringing Silicon Valley and China together, to bring the two entities together to create startups. Now, he's got a very good inside view of what's happening in China and how China is positioned, and I'll just give you the short sort of summary of his views, because I think they're very interesting. He says expertise is being replaced by implementation. So the lead that the West had in creativity is not going to be there forever, because data, machine learning is taking over, and China's got so much of that. So although the West, by the West here, he's always referring to Silicon Valley, he kind of leaves everybody else out of the picture, but He's saying that the two places in the world, particularly where you've got AI expertise, are Silicon Valley and China these days. The rest of the world just doesn't count. There may be a little bit here in Israel, a little bit there in the UK, but they don't really count. So China is likely to be the leading digital nation while America declines. He's not saying that so much. There's another guy called Tyler Cowen who's saying that. Tyler Cowen's an economist, but I'll give you the Li Kai-fu story first before I talk about what Tyler Cowen says. Well, I'll tell you what Tyler Cowen says first because it's quite succinct. Tyler Cowen says that America is becoming less innovative. He said that the millennial generation in America are innovating less. They're getting lazy. There's no sense of crisis. So he's a little bit pessimistic about the innovative sort of mentality in America. Whether that's true or not, Li Kai-fu has a different vision. He thinks that Silicon Valley is still going gangbusters, but China's going gangbusters. But he says that China will become a digital superpower, will become an AI superpower for one simple reason, and this to me is quite frightening. I'll share it with you and see what you think. You might, some of the people in this room are Chinese and you might disagree. Chinese people don't care about privacy. And he doesn't say it exactly that way, but he infers that Chinese people are quite happy to give up their data. They're very happy to go online and give their data up. They don't worry about the kind of privacy things that we in Australia or in the US or UK are worried about now. We're worried about Facebook, you know, things are hacking into our data. We're starting to become but Chinese people still, they're putting their fingerprints everywhere, and it's allowing the companies to harvest. The algorithms are harvesting all these things up so much that they know where the Chinese people are all the time. And this is going to make China an AI superpower because you need more data. The algorithms just feed off it. And so, you know, I worry about the social credit system, for example. The social credit system in China is a way of tracking what people are doing all the time, and it's been developed into a system for managing people and giving them bonuses for good behaviour or bad behaviour. Social credit. So that's like what social credit is in the financial industries. They can track if you're a good lender or a borrower, and you develop a credit. But in China, it's being extended to the whole population as a way of understanding what people are in the country. You can pick people out.
That's currently happening.
It's currently happening.
Wow.
Yep. There are 3 or 4 pilot schemes, but they're already very successful, and they're in collaboration with some of the big companies like Alibaba. So yeah. So connectivity is the first one. What happens here is China is laying out the fibre optic cable through the One Belt, One Road, through Kazakhstan, through Central Asia, and once it lays out the fibre optic cable, it connects these countries with China, and the Chinese companies like ZTE and Huawei, Alibaba, go in there, and everything comes back. So once you're on the Chinese system, all the data is going back to China. Empire. The second optic we can look through it is this a Chinese empire? Is this empire building, or is this just China being a good global citizen? And this is a convoluted argument. Now, the Silk Roads from 2nd century BCE to 14th century AD, rather, that was when trade and connectivity happened between the West and the East. And at that time, China had a great empire. It was a great empire. There was no doubt about it. The term empire was a term that was used. And Chang'an, which is now Xi'an, was the end point. The end point of according to most people, but in the Chinese in particular, it was Xi'an that was the end point, the starting point. What we see now with the BRI, perhaps, is a new world order. A new world order in the making. And why is this important? Because of the Chinese concept of tianxia. Now, tianxia is something that they're packing into this idea of what they're going to do in the One Belt, One Road. It literally means all under heaven. All under heaven. It's an idea that goes back to traditional Chinese political thinking that the Chinese world order was based upon relationships between people with an emperor at the centre, and he ruled over the empire in a benign way. Quite different from the nation-state idea. So the nation-state idea came much later, and then China had to become a nation-state to join in the system. The Tianxia idea is quite complex, but it presupposes that this will be a new way of ruling the world, which will get away from the kind of troubles that are plaguing the Western world. Because people in China can look at the Western world now and they can see this is falling apart. This system that you've developed, capitalism, nation states, it's fragmenting, whereas in China, our system based upon Tianxia is a much more suitable system for the world, and they can export this idea to the One Belt, One Road countries. So the idea of civilization is the third way of looking at it. The idea is very related to Tianxia, the civilization state. There's this concept that China is not really a nation state in the sense that but it harks back to history where it's a civilizational state. And so you have people like Martin Jakes. Martin Jakes, a British Marxist who wrote a book called When China Rules the World. And another person, Zhang Weiwei, who is also a writer who wrote a book called The China Horizon, Glory and Dreams of a Civilizational State. So the idea of a civilizational state is being put forward as a different way of looking at the world. And the question is, how might the shared history of the region be used as a glue to cement relationships between China and its Central Asian neighbours? By promoting this idea of civilization, shared history. In order to do that, it's easier said than done though, because these regions are quite complex and they've got different... One of the things that immediately comes to mind is that China has no real religion. Well, you can say it has Christianity, it has Buddhism, but it doesn't have a creator. It doesn't have a creator God, whereas most of the other countries in the One Belt, One Road belong to some kind of creation myth. And there is a very strong ethic of a religious ethic. So the idea of a Chinese Confucian civilizational state may not fit very well in Islamic countries or other places along the One Belt, One Road. That's one of the issues with the civilizational argument. But this is what you see in China now. You see this AI superpower. This is in Shenzhen last year when I was there, and everyone's focused on how China can become very, very a global leader, and it already is a global leader according to Li Kai-fu and many others. And many, many Australian companies are flocking to China, and many, many international companies are going over there because there's so much venture capital sloshing around in China, so much venture capital. And where will this lead? Okay, here's one scenario. What will happen in the machine age, the robot age, is that, and this is the crux of Made in China 2025 that Trump's worried about. Machines will take the jobs of people working on the low end. Now that's going to be probably okay for China to a certain extent, but the rest of the countries in Asia, they're going to lose all that low-cost production that is necessary for a developing country to rise up. They're going to be gutted. And with China becoming the digital superpower, they're going to become reliant on China. So countries like Singapore might fare well enough. They're already a small country, but other countries in Central Asia are going to be using Chinese algorithms. They're going to be connected to China or Silicon Valley. But that's the scenario. So this idea of that should be competitive connectivity rather. Competitive connectivity is a concept used by Parag Khanna. He's written a book called Connectography, but the argument there is that the true map of the world should feature not just states, but megacities, highways, cables, rail lines, pipelines, internet cables, and other symbols of our emerging global network civilization. It's a very interesting sort of analysis of how we are connected, increasingly connected. Now these, getting back to this idea of the One Belt, One Road, why is this so important for China to become a digital superpower? Why does this help China become a... Well, it's the same for it's the same for YouTube and Facebook, really. You know, these countries, these regions are taking up social media so fast. The fastest growing markets for social media use are Central Asia and Southern Asia. You know, people are going online, they're finding these devices, they're finding these platforms, they're sharing things. And so you've got to get in there. That's their fastest growing. So when China gets in there and they can get people on WeChat, for instance, it's great for them. So the question is, how does Chinese culture move through digital platforms, and how is the Silk Road being reframed, reshaped and reimagined through various channels, both government and commercial? This to me is a kind of research question that we're looking at. And I'll finish up in about 5 minutes, but what I'm suggesting here is that this is a way we can look at it. We can look at the world, we can look at the New World Order, we can look at Eurasia, and even Australia's role in it through the three levels, which is connectivity, which is empire, and which is civilization. And we'll get a deeper, more comprehensive analysis than if we just look at it through international relations or economy. How we might do that, we're thinking, I mean, you know, one of the ways we would look at for instance, the representations of the One Belt, One Road, the representations, you would go to a CGTN, China Global Television Network. It's an entity that's replaced China Television International a few years ago. It used to be called CCTV International. Now it's a digital version of CCTV, and it sends out representations guided by the government about how to frame China's development ideas. For example, the One Belt, One Road video, if anybody's... I didn't put the video. There's about 5 or 6 videos, short videos, about the One Belt, One Road done in hip-hop. Hip-hop versions in English, hip-hop versions in Indonesian, or they're carefully crafted propaganda pieces to show that, hey, the One Belt, One Road, it's all funky. It's all that they're... China Global TV Network, through the propaganda departments, are using very, very modern forms of communication to show that this is a great idea for everybody. So we'd look at the official levels like that. We also look at various places within the Silk Road or outside the Silk Road. For example, in Japan, in Nara. Nara was the Japanese end of the Silk Road. The Japanese claimed that as there, and they've got UNESCO cultural heritage rights because the Silk Road. So Japan has a stake in how the Silk Road is redefined or described. At the institutional level, we would look at the museum level. For example, digital Dunhuang and the digital grottos at Dunhuang, which Xinhuang, Tencent are engaged in. Xinyang down there has introduced me to this developments, and they're very interesting developments because the commercial companies are jumping in there and saying, well, we can help you exploit or commercialize or use the concept of the Silk Roads in our gaming platforms. Or we can build virtual reality. We can help you build virtual reality exhibitions that can help promote the Silk Road. But if Tencent are involved in it, they're going to be doing it based on the Chinese way of representing the Silk Road, obviously. But bringing in the history of the Silk Road in a way that keeps everyone happy. So commercial media representations as well. There are commercial media representations. For example, Legends of the Silk Road. I came across this a couple of years ago when I was in Korea, and this is a TV drama. I haven't seen it, but I don't know if anybody else has seen it. But I imagine, without wondering too much about it, looking at it, it's in Xinjiang province, and so it's trying to recreate the history of Xinjiang province as being a harmonious place in which Uyghur people and Chinese people all work together and build a harmonious future. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done because these regions are very volatile. But if you can create representations of it, perhaps you can get the message across. And that's finally where I'm going to end up my presentation, on the idea that there are representations of the Silk Road that abound from many different perspectives, historically, from historians, sociologists, political analysts. But now the Silk Road is being reimagined, redefined, and the question is probably at the end of the day, here in Australia, where do we fit in? So I'll leave it at that.